2 billion lines of code, one repository, and around 40,000 commits landing every single day. That's not a data center, that's Google's code base. And every engineer there is working out of the same tree right now as you watch this. So the obvious takeaway is Monorepos won. Go migrate everything, right? Yeah, no, because when you actually look at what Google, Meta, Microsoft, and Amazon are doing, the real answer is way weirder and way more useful. Than Monorepo good, Polyrepo bad, let me show you what's actually going on. Quick reset because half of the internet gets this wrong. A monorepo isn't one giant file and it's not all your code smushed together. It's one version control repository that holds many projects like services, libraries, tools, all sharing one commit history. A polyrepo is the opposite. Every service or team gets its own repository, its own history, its own pipeline. That's the whole distinction. Here's the part that matters. People constantly confuse the repo layout with the architecture. You can run microservices inside a monorepo. You can run a monolith across polyrepos. Repo topology and system architecture are two different axes. Hold on to that because it turns out to be the entire punchline. So, why do the big players reach for monorepos at all? A few genuinely great reasons. First is atomic commits. That is, you change an API and fix every caller in the same commit. No coordinating 14 pull requests across 14 repos. Secondly, one source of truth. Everyone builds against head, one version of each library, so you dodge the whole works on my machine because I'm three versions behind mess. Then there's refactoring, renaming a file and fix 2000 call sites in a single change atomically, and unified tooling. One build config, one lint setup, one CI story for everything instead of copy pasting config across 50 repos. When it works, it honestly feels like a superpower, but and this is the part that most blog posts skip, that superpower does not come for free. Vanilla Git falls over long before it hits Google scale. Think about it like Git status has to stat every file. Git clone pulls the entire history of everything. At a few million files, those go from milliseconds to minutes. Then CI. The naive setup retests the entire repo on every commit. So a one line change kicks off an hour long pipeline. Multiply that by thousands of commits a day, and you've built yourself a very expensive traffic jam. And ownership gets murky. And everything lives in one tree. Who owns what and who's even allowed to touch it? None of this is theoretical. This is exactly why the giants didn't just use a monorepo, they had to engineer one from the ground up. So let's go company by company because the details are the whole story. Google, it has one monorepo because they did not use Git for it. They run a custom system called Piper, a virtual file system called Sitsi. So engineers only sync the slice they touch and Bazel as the build system. Meta is also a monorepo, also not on vanilla Git. They built something called Sapling, a source control system, originally a Mercurial fork, plus edenfs for virtual file access and Buck2 to build it all. Microsoft is the wild one. They moved Windows itself into Git monorepo, hundreds of gigabytes, millions of files, and to make Git even survive that, they wrote VFS for Git, then Scalar, and then pushed a huge chunk of that work upstream into Git itself as partial clone and sparse checkout. So everyone's Git got faster because of Windows. And then there's Amazon, the counter example. Amazon is famously a polyrepo, thousands of small services, two pizza teams, each team owning its own repos and its own deploy cadence, stitched together by a build system called Brazil. Same era, same scale, opposite choice. So it's clearly not one size fits all, but look closer because underneath these opposite choices, every single one of them poured enormous effort into the exact same thing, the build graph. Every one of those tools, Bazel, Buck2, Brazil, models your code as dependency graph. Each box here is a build target, each arrow is depends on. Now watch, you change one target, say auth, a smart build system doesn't rebuild the world. It walks a graph and rebuilds only what actually depends on auth, the affected set. Everything else is left untouched. And it goes even further. Every input gets content hashed. So if a teammate or last night's CI already built this exact thing, you don't rebuild it at all. You pull the result straight from a remote cache. That, not the repo layout, is the actual monorepo superpower. And here's a plot twist. That superpower used to be locked inside Fang, then it escaped. NX and TurboRepo, which Vercel acquired and rewrote in Rust, brought affected graph builds and remote caching to normal TypeScript teams. A 5% startup now gets Google style incremental builds with a 20 line config file. So put the whole picture together. Start with your repo topology, one repo or many, and here's a reframe. That's basically a logistics decision. Because on top of it, everyone is converging on the same stack. Model the code as a dependency graph, content address, and cache every build, and only rebuild the affected set. That layer right there is the win. The graph, the cache, the affected builds. Once you have it, whether your code sits in one repo or 50 stops being performance question and becomes boundary and ownership question. That's the thing. The industry didn't pick a side in monorepo versus polyrepo. It quietly moved up a level and made the whole debate kind of beside the point. So what should you actually do? Because you're probably not shipping Windows. Lean monorepo when your projects are tightly coupled, share a ton of code, and one org owns them end to end. You live on atomic commits and fearless refactors, and NX or Turbo Repo will carry you way further than you'd expect. Lean polyrepo when teams deploy on totally independent cadences, when you need hard boundaries, separate security domains, external or open source code, or when your org chart genuinely maps to separate ownership. And honestly, most healthy setups are somewhere in between. A few monorepos split along real team lines. The point was never the layout, it's getting the graph based tooling right underneath whatever layout you pick. So the next time someone starts the monorepo versus polyrepo holy war, you can entirely skip it. It was never really that question. It's whether your build graph is smart. If this reframed the debate for you, the deep dive on how Bazel style remote caching actually works is the perfect next watch. Thank you.